special meeting of the Board of Ed to order at 5:30. Steve, can you do roll call for us?
I certainly can. Mr. Anderson.
Here.
Ms. Broculio.
Here.
Mrs. Cushman.
Here.
Mrs. Gerard.
Here.
Mr. Gauss.
Here.
Mrs. Kiner.
Here.
Mr. Kober.
Present.
Mrs. McGuire-Bruce.
Here.
And Board Chair Pickett.
I am here.
All right, we have all 9 here.
Awesome, 9 present. So before I hand this over to you, Steve, and our guests, I do want to remind the public that this is a special meeting focused solely on the ed specs from Tecton Architects. As per our guidelines for special meetings, there's no opportunity for audience comments, and our agenda includes only this single item. Ed specs are defined by Connecticut general statutes as a description of general nature and purpose of the proposed school buildings, which may include applicants' long-range educational plan and the relationship to the proposed project to such plan, enrollment data, proposed project capacity, the nature and organization of the educational programs, support facilities, space needs, accommodations for educational technology, specialized equipment and site needs, and any other supporting documents deemed necessary. Ed specs are a required component of the school construction grant process and must be approved by the local Board of Ed as part of the grant application due on or before June 30th of every year. They're important because they ensure that a school facility is purpose-built around the district's curriculum, instructional philosophy, student population, and community needs. It's important to note that the intent of Ed spec document is to establish the project framework. It's not the final design. The approach is to be as comprehensive as possible in order to avoid ineligible reimbursement costs. This allows the community, district, and our building committee the flexibility to determine what's ultimately included in the project during the design phase. Steve, anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. And you probably did the first few slides intro for Jeff and the team as well. So just before we start, thank you very much to Jeff, Antonia, Chris, and the rest of his team for everything that they've done. It has been a bit of a process to get here, but I can tell you that the work that they do is just phenomenal. Nothing but impressed by everything that they've been doing, the quality of the work. And even I sent your questions, because you had the ed specs, I sent them Tuesday morning, and today you have your updated revisions to incorporate everything with the questions or concerns that you had. So these guys are just relentless. So outstanding work. Can't wait to continue to hopefully move forward with this process. And with that, Jeff, I believe you're driving the show.
Great. Thank you. Is this okay? Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Wazinski. I'm a principal at Tecton Architects.
And my name is Antonia Ciavarella. I'm an architectural designer at Tecton.
I don't know if you want to introduce.
Oh, so smart. So smart, Randy.
Yes, hi there. I'm Randy Daigle. I am fortunate to be the chairman of this committee.
Chris Cycley, MGMT Construction.
Tina LeBlanc, Vice Chair of the committee.
All right, so just point of order, a couple of handouts in front of you. We have a brief presentation to walk you through the purpose, kind of the road that we've traveled to date as far as the project, and then a summary overview of the educational specifications. As the superintendent had mentioned, we have all the proposed modifications that we received via electronic correspondence have been incorporated into the educational specifications throughout. So all 5 ed specs have these modifications with a revised date of today's date. So those were just transmitted via PDF earlier this afternoon. And then there's a couple other questions that I think are less about working them into the educational specification and more about explaining what we have in there and how it relates to one another. So that we've included in the presentation. So without further ado, I do. Okay, so hopefully everybody, you can see the green screen. All right. Okay, so we'll give you a very high-level overview. There's some more down in that. Yes, sorry. Very high-level overview of the path that we traveled as far as the master plan. We'll get into the educational specifications, what's included, and then more review it more specifically, or at least sections of the educational specifications. And then if you have any further questions, happy to answer them. So I believe most of you have been following along. We've had 3 community conversations, a couple different think tanks, a lot of community engagement, and at least a dozen, if not up to, I think, 15 or so pre-referendum committee meetings. So why are we doing this? 4 main components: aging facilities, so the average age is about 58 years old; educational needs, which is fully explained in the educational specifications. We also looked at capacity district-wide, looked at the demographics and enrollment, and then the last one, most importantly, is maximize reimbursement, right? So those are the 4 components. Who was involved? I mentioned the pre-referendum committee, the community at large, really good engagement, a lot of good feedback. That really helped shape the plan and the educational specification that's in front of you. So faculty, students, parents, great district involvement as far as helping shape the educational program. And then our consultant team, which we introduced earlier. So what are we asking you to review and approve tonight? So where we landed was with 4 new pre-K to 5 schools. So each one has its own educational specification. For the most part, the program is identical. The site descriptions and narratives are slightly different, so that's the only modification. So looking at 4 pre-K to 5s, and then a relocation and reimagination of Eagle Academy. So that's the home for the specialized academics and therapeutic program, and that will go on into the existing Eli Whitney. Again, as some of the feedback we received as we went through the community engagement, making sure we had a long-range and thoughtful plan for all the buildings in the district, and then making sure that we keep our eye on space to grow the programs. So what this plan includes is essentially the 4 pre-K to 5s in Eagle at Eli Whitney, and then the potential for, in a future phase, adaptive reuse of 4 other buildings that you see in the district today. So again, a long-range plan, a holistic approach for your community. We're here tonight because we're working towards about 3 dozen or so electronic grant application checklist items. The educational specifications, or the approval of them from the Board of Education, is one major component of this grant application. The current plan right now is to go to fall referendum, and then with any luck, with support of the community, construction would begin for the first phase in mid-2028. And then 3 elementary schools would open in fall of 2030, with the remaining pre-K-5 and Eagle Academy opening in 2032. Again, long-range plan, 8-10 years of work went into this. So why this plan? I mentioned flexibility and growth, maximizing that reimbursement, reducing the transitions from school to school for the students and the parents. We know that proves to be a more successful educational environment, creating an equitable educational experience. We talked a lot about maintaining the magic of the ELC culture, so we spent quite a bit of time focusing on that, understanding it, and trying to fold it into the educational specification, and making sure that we have purposeful space, right? Planned, appropriate space for your programs. You have a wonderful program for the specialized education. It's needed. That is fully programmed into the educational specifications. So again, mentioned a plan for every building as well. So as this slide indicates, we spent a fair amount of time looking at what makes Stowe so special, and making sure that that culture, that brand, that atmosphere is folded into the pre-K to 5s. This slide here in front of you is one example of how we might articulate that during the design, but making sure that these diagrams are folded into the narratives of the educational specification. So making sure there's a unique atmosphere and community for the pre-K early ed students, making sure that they have dedicated drop-off, dedicated play, the adjacency relationship of the grade levels from a pre-K to 5, making sure that you have pre-K to K, early learners all in a similar area, and then that magic of being able to share those larger spaces, those special spaces with the pre-K program, so that there's a natural progression from pre-K all the way up through grades 5. So a little bit more detail about the project. So again, we're asking for all 5 projects being approved from the educational specification component. We're going to submit all 5 at once and then design it and build it in 2 different phases. 2026 to 30 would be phase 1. You can see them on the left side of this slide is the geographic location and the name of the school. And then on the right-hand side is the 2 phases. And then we'd follow up with Henry Barnard site and then Eli Whitney. Not going to spend a lot of time on the components because we've had plenty of community conversations, but can certainly go back to this if there's any questions. Done all kinds of cost analysis, validated our costs with construction managers that are familiar with school construction in the state of Connecticut, along with Chris. Went through all of this and validated the budgets, making sure that they're accurate for when we submit to the state. We're comfortable with all the numbers, escalation, contingencies, and then the calculation for the reimbursement to the state. On the bottom of this slide shows the green bar is the design phase, so all the planning that goes into designing the buildings. The white is the construction, and you can kind of see that staggered there. So why we're asking you to review and approve the ed specs this evening is we want to submit our grant application prior to June 30th. What this does is it locks in your reimbursement rate and all the components, the program, the scope, the size, the costs related to the project. And then it goes through the process of approval. With a complete grant application, you'll be put on a priority list that comes out December 15th, and then it starts going through the legislative approval process in February of next year, and then ultimately, sometime in the spring session of 2027, you'll get commitment letters for all of these projects that we're presenting this evening. So where we are in a micro schedule is we've pretty much completed our master plan and have the preferred option. We're knee-deep into the grant application materials. And for anybody that wants to stay after this meeting, we're having a pre-referendum committee meeting to give you an update on all of the details and activities related to the grant application. So thank you for the summary, Chair. I think it was a good job setting up the purpose of the educational specification. So this is not about design. It's really about making sure it's an all-encompassing, inclusive description, a guidebook for you to build, design, and build your building. And the important piece here is making sure that we're as inclusive as possible so that it's reimbursed by the state, right? So you don't have to do everything in there, but if you do something that's not in there, then you're subject to ineligible costs and reimbursements. We want to make sure that's why it's a pretty robust document. There's about 15 different sections from rationale all the way through to the list of every single space that would be in the building with a lot of exciting stuff that Antonia will review in the middle.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. So on your screen is, of course, not how we educate our students today, but in the age and the vintage of the buildings that we're talking about, there was no technology. There were no dedicated rooms for specialized education. That didn't exist. And today's schools, you see a lot more flexibility. You see a lot more hands-on, inquiry-based learning taking place. You see these buildings as community resources, and you see a lot of that interdisciplinary collaboration happening, as well as those student support services in those spaces that are purposely built for those specific needs. And what we know from evidence-based design is that when you focus on student health and providing them with the appropriate spaces to support their social and emotional health, physical health, creative and cognitive health, you can impact how they think and perform in school, and that ultimately impacts them over their lifespan. And there's proof that the building impacts human health directly and can impact education as much as 16 to 25%. We've had a lot of great meetings, a lot of great conversations from the PRC meetings in green to some of our specialized program focus meetings in dark navy and some of our community events and think tanks in the teal. So a blend of different types of conversations and those PRC meetings open to the public, some great opportunities there for public participation as well. So lots of teamwork, lots of great discussions that folded into these ed specs. So we're really grateful to the community and all of the input. In terms of the program, we have largely dedicated spaces for general academic classrooms and those supporting spaces within the small learning communities that we'll talk about, as well as specialized education. You see that the blue, the cyan, and that dark green are a bulk, the majority really, of the pie that makes up your program for your new schools. And that was intentional. We're designing these spaces to support that flexible learning, to support the specialized education program that is so important to the district. It allows you to keep a lot of students in district, which is critical, and you service more specialized educational students in district than the state as a whole. So power to you, it's awesome, and that's why we're focusing so much of our space on those two core components. So in addition, we definitely have focused classrooms for especially the early childhood. You see some pre-kindergarten, some integrated pre-kindergarten, kindergarten classrooms that formulate that early childhood area of the building. And then there are grades 1 through 5 classrooms as well that will be organized into small learning communities. And what we mean by that is there could be a grade level or a combination of grade levels that exist within a space surrounded by teacher workrooms, intervention spaces, spaces for collaboration and breakout, small group areas, all within general proximity to their academic classrooms. So the majority of the spaces that students will need are right there in their home base, and then they can travel to some of these other great amenities on the next slide there. So things like art and music, your stage and performance space, your gymnasium that is actually a middle school sized gymnasium space, so it's going to be a great community amenity. You have gross motor breakout areas built in, a media center that really allows that collaboration to take place between some project-based learning with your makerspace and also some podcasting opportunities, teacher workrooms spread throughout, and of course cafeteria and services related to that. Front of house administration, nurse, school-based health clinic, all incorporated as well. We know that pre-K has their own dedicated admin and support spaces, so that's a part of the administrative component as well.
So I mentioned at the onset that we've incorporated all of the comments that we received that we could into the revised ed specs. And the next few slides, and we'll conclude there and open it up to questions, is really to explain the thought process that doesn't necessarily have to be incorporated into the educational specification, but it's important to communicate to this board, but also to the community, that there was a lot of thought given to the progression of these types of spaces. So go ahead.
Yeah, great setup. So when we think about these spaces that are collaborative, we have some of those, but we also have some really specialized dedicated spaces. So that is kind of the spectrum that's before you on the screen. So we have areas of flexible use that can be small group rooms, they can be resource rooms, they can be intervention rooms in those small learning communities to really maximize the value of those spaces and offer that flexibility within the learning environment to set you up for years to come. But then we have spaces like OTPT and sensory that have specialized equipment or specialized needs within those spaces, and those are areas that can be centralized within the building, designed, purpose-built for those specific pieces. And then we have spaces like the DLP, the SOAR, the ALP, those specialized classrooms that again connect to those small learning communities, but are spaces where those students spend a lot of their educational time. So we really want to design those specifically to meet their needs and support their educational goals. So there's flexibility to really dedicated spaces along this continuum of service that's provided within the
Right, and so starting on the left, the flexible use allows for a much more efficient plan too. So the space is much more efficient where you can use it for multiple purposes instead of dedicated. So from the left side, flexible all the way to the dedicated. I think there was a good balance there in the overall ed spec. So safety was a great question. Just at the onset, we're required to meet the school safety infrastructure guidelines as far as a grant application. So there's a whole book that really should be updated to current standards. But Obviously, it's a paramount in today's educational facilities. So we're going to lightly touch on some of the topics and the approach, and not necessarily get into all the specifics, because some of those should be in executive session. So first, we want maintain a welcoming atmosphere, right? So any integration of safety, we want to make sure that it's really not right up front in your face. The aesthetic is the important piece, the function, and with the backdrop of making sure that it performs safely. Balancing the technology features, so you can't just rely on technology and devices with design strategies, and that's an important piece that we'll get into in just one more slide here. And then the full coverage, both interior and exterior. So it starts the moment that you step on the site, right? So what is that safety mentality, that process, those techniques? What are those folded into the design? So during the design, there'll be a lot of discussion relative to this. There's a narrative in the ed spec that kind of hits on the topics of these. And there's 5 categories that we would look at. Like natural surveillance basically just means making sure that administrative spaces that are normally occupied, have eyes on the site. So when you enter the site, you automatically can see whether it's a visitor, deliveries, whatever it may be. It goes in the design component. Natural and access control, making sure that we are thoughtful about the placement of sidewalks, but also landscaping is a great technique as a means to kind of focus and funnel individuals and visitors to where you want them to enter the building. Making sure that there's reinforcement in the not only the building exterior, but purposeful, as I mentioned, landscaping as well. And then systems and maintenance, and also activity and support. So some of the techniques mentioned, keeping eyes at the main entry. We all know about the secure entrances. You've done a pretty good job in the district with that. But really thinking hard about the landscape design and the points of entry, and using the design to help you create a safer environment. And lastly, just making sure that you put public, forward-facing community and/or occupied spaces along the front of your building. So those are some very basic techniques. Then when you start rolling into more of the specifics, we can start getting into the materials, specifically glazing. There's often a discussion around how much is too much as far as glazing. How is that building secured with an all-glass building? So we can get into all of those techniques. The types of different manufacturers, systems that are offered, and then more specifically, I think in one of the emails that was asked is about access control, locking, what's the latest and greatest. And believe me, this is focused, this is a big focus from how do you secure lockdowns, in classrooms. Is it easy? Is it quick? One, motion. So there's some imagery here of some of the devices that we may include should this project proceed as far as safety and security. So again, from a design perspective, high level, holistic, but from a detailed perspective, the details truly do matter. When you start looking at the building itself, it's really about access management, compartmentalization, and then layering it with materials, right? So it's all about delay and deter. Once you start getting into the design of the facilities, we can talk about that layering technique, because you don't want it to be upfront and seen visually in the building. You want it to be designed and incorporated in a way that it's there should you need it. So these diagrams, I won't get into detail, but I can certainly go back to. One other question that we had was arrival and dismissal, and I'm not going to get into times because that's not our charge. But one of the questions that it's important, and this is a site plan diagram. So the blue boxes, consider that the building with the yellow backdrop. So you have a K-5 and a pre-K, and then you'll have parking around the building. So obviously, the step one is making sure you have focused entry points. Typically, you have entry at pre-K and 1 or 2 at the K to 5, just from a bus and parent drop-off perspective. And then you'll have pre-K is a much different drop-off. It's either assisted or they park and bring the students in. So that's a different kind of level, different sequence, different parking needs and traffic flow. And then you'll have your conventional. So this diagram is what we try to achieve. And all of this presentation will be an appendix to the educational specification so that you can use this as a tool as you move forward with the design. But separating bus, separating parent drop-off, and then having those cues. So I think hopefully this answers some of the, I guess, topical questions related to arrival and dismissal. And then, of course, pedestrian access and flow is another important piece. And then I'll give a high-level summary, and if I don't do a good enough job, Antonia will back me up on this. But so student support spaces, there'll be an awful lot of discussion about the design, locations, adjacencies, the flexibility, but this slide represents some of the main components in the educational specification and how they could be laid out from an adjacency perspective. So we're seeing co-locations of social workers and counselors with a small group work area. I'm on the bottom of the slide here. I won't read the top, but looking at the adjacency relationships and then the shared space in the middle so that they can have breakouts, they can have workrooms, they can have meetings, but they're all kind of related to one another. So you have kind of starting on the left side of this with the green, and then when you start looking at academic coaches and academic coaches conference rooms and support facilities, those can have a relationship. And then ultimately, all of these need to have a relationship to the central administrative suite with the nurse and school-based health center. So there's an intricate relationship from an adjacency perspective, and then there's a delicate balance of placing some of these program elements within the grade level learning communities, and then some kind of towards a central location, and then some at the entry of what would be considered the entry of the building. So generally speaking, a lot to explore during design, definitely, but understanding the relationships of how these folks work with one another is an important piece. And then the last question we had was about a food pantry, or I'll I guess step back and say more community partnership or community support spaces. And there's two in the building currently. A parent family resource center at about 325 square feet, so it's, I guess, considered a large classroom, maybe like a half or maybe a third of a regular classroom that you would see. So it's a pretty good size space as a resource center that could have millwork along the wall for storage of materials. In this case, it could be community supplies, it could be food, it could be any kind of goods that you may want to support that particular portion of the community with. And then on the right-hand side of this slide there's a community-based health center, and oftentimes, we do a fair amount of these. Oftentimes, these are adjacent to kind of the main admin and nurse area, but also have the ability to have a separate entry. I think obviously that came into play with COVID last 5 years as far as using our schools as that community center. But this area could be another potential area to support those kinds of questions that I think we received during the last week or so. So with that, I know that was a whirlwind tour of what was included. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
First, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the Tecton team. Thank you to the chair and vice chair, and thank you to the whole committee who I know, like you, put all those meeting dates out, did a lot of work. Thank you to all the community members who participated, showed up at events, have given your feedback. This really is a community project. It's not just for people who have kids in schools. This really benefits our complete whole community. So I really appreciate the due diligence that you've done and your thoughtful work. I also really appreciate that you've taken some questions last minute and incorporated it into your slides. Many of those came from me, so I apologize. But also appreciate that you took the time to do that and updated that. A couple things that I just want to highlight, and then I'm going to open it up. We are going to ask for clarifying questions. Again, just going to reiterate, the ed specs is not final design. I know lots of us probably have lots of nitty-gritty questions, even some of mine that you incorporated were nitty-gritty questions, more consideration for the building committee, but appreciate you taking the time to do that. I know personally for myself, Antonia, I thank you for understanding the magic of Stowe and your attention to that and to care to that. And I also see some really great opportunities for us to reimagine our specialized programming, especially specialized special ed programs. How do we embed those? How do we service students in a really most cost-effective way? So thank you so much. Any clarifying questions from those of us up here? Mr. Kober.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll kick us off, and I'll keep my questions kind of general because I didn't get a chance to kind of put us together to email you guys. But obviously the ed specs and the design phase, we talked about how they're separate. But going through for like the 4 elementary schools that are being built, since the ed specs are identical, square footage is identical, we're expecting identical student counts. Is it fair to say, is the plan like moving towards design for those to look identical in terms of what the final product would look like? Or could you just speak to that, I guess, a little bit as to how that would unfold?
Yeah, great question. So no, they shouldn't look identical. I think we're big on schools, community buildings reflecting basically the community for which it exists. So we know there's a lot of history here in Enfield with the various different areas of your town. Our expectation and the way that it's pretty much absent as far as specific direction on aesthetics, and that's intentional because I think it's very important to make sure that the design of this facility and the aesthetic reflects the area of the school itself. So another, just to follow up on that, a good example is in Cheshire, where there's more or less, they're building 2 similar, almost identical elementary schools, pre-K 5, and different sections of the community, completely different designs. And that was intentional, and it was based in the designs were reflective of the input we received. So absolutely, we would expect them to be different.
Awesome, I appreciate that. And looking back at like some of our current schools, I know we have some similar designs. Like if you look at Henry Barnard, Eli Whitney, they're kind of like if you look at them from like an aerial view, they kind of are similar age style. So I did have another, again, a general question kind of tying into that, but like looking at in the slide talking about the total project cost for each one, like one of them, and again, it's separate from reimbursement, but one was like listed as 105 million. One I think went up to like 114. So again, since we're talking like same square footage, same student count, same educational space, could you speak a little to why there'd be a variation of several $1 million between each building?
Yeah, another great question. I think we've heard it as well at some of the community conversations, that question. So a couple different things. The sites are different. The plan is to keep the occupied school build either on the side of or back of the existing building safely. So the sites are different size. The buildings are slightly different size and slightly different vintages. So the demolition related to those is different. And then lastly, which is a bigger one between a couple of them, is when you phase them out, the escalation is different as well. So we have 2 that are we're staggering. We're doing 3 and a 2. So the 2 that are further out have more escalation, a larger or higher escalation factor in them. But site, demolition of the existing buildings, and then the escalation. So, yeah, good question.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll ask one more, and then I'll yield to some other members. So just when we're talking about like educational spacing and like site consideration, obviously we focused a lot on the interior. So I guess my clarifying question is, does that square footage, would that include like hallways, corridors, staircases? Like, is that captured in the square footage? Because I couldn't seem to identify that clearly. And I just kind of figured, like, how does that play into the specs overall and like reimbursement and stuff like that? Obviously, the smaller schools usually have smaller hallways versus high school. So if you just kind of speak to that a little.
Yeah. Hopefully they have hallways, yeah, otherwise we're in trouble. No, great question. So there's a program in kind of the tail end of the ed spec, and at the last page of that, It has a net program square footage, and that's all of the rooms themselves, right? So if you added up every room, that's called net program area. And then there's a circulation factor that we add, so about 25 to 30% for your hallways, your wall thicknesses, your chases, and things like that. So we would fully expect, and we do a fair amount of this planning, in between an efficiency rate of about 25 to 30%. So if you take your net program area, you would add 25 to 30% on top for your hallways, stairs, wall thicknesses. And one distinction here is, because you may or may not hear criticism, because some efficiency factors might be up in the 40s. Our approach is to make sure that we define every space in the building that we can, so including mechanical, custodial, all the support spaces. So that's why we believe this is a more accurate representation of what you'll end up with for the building. So long-winded answer to say about 25%.
Awesome. No, thank you. I had a few others, but I'll let some other members go and circle back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kober? Any other questions? Mr. Anderson?
Hi, how are you? With the school cost breakdown, I see all 5 schools on here. What I don't see is Stowe, Enfield Street, and Alcorn's costs. Do you know the costs for the plan on those, both the total cost and the portion for Enfield?
So I'll answer from the architect's perspective, and then if others want to chime in. But we were charged with focusing on the schools first, and then making sure we had a plan for every building. So we, fully recognizing the ambitious plan related to the elementary schools, the decision was made to make sure that we have a future plan for what the uses are. What that cost is, it's going to be, 6-8 years out, so far out that it wasn't, I guess, responsible to start putting numbers to those. We did have conversations about exploring every avenue for reimbursement, because some of those programs will be eligible for state reimbursement and some won't. So that's where the conversations have been had, as far as where we can maximize reimbursement, but not total costs related to it. So we don't have the costs, is the short answer to that.
There's not defined programs and what they're going to be used for, so there's no way of us determining construction.
Yeah, I would just add, Mr. Anderson, that for the Enfield Street School, because that one part of the plan was for relocation of central office, the adult education, the alternative education, Buzz Robotics. So that would largely be all school-based. So that is one where we would be able to go through a school construction grant and receive some reimbursement. And part of that conversation was also about the steps that we can take as a Board of Education between now and 8 years down the road to be able to offset the need to go to additional referendum for those. The other 2 buildings would no longer be under the purview of the Board of Education and would be a town decision in terms of how they wanted to adjust Stowe. There's plenty of work in Stowe that can just needs more space, so they could actually spread out a little bit. But that's for the purview of the town. And then related to Alcorn, we've had initial conversations and discussions as part of the pre-referendum committee, but no final determinations. But again, that would be outside of the purview of the board. That would be another town building.
Right. And I don't know if you can answer this, but the portion that the town's responsible for, is that bonded over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Any idea?
I believe it's bonded over 20 years.
20 years bonds, what the typical can do in a town.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Ride.
Thank you. Obviously, I've been to a lot of the meetings, but I just I had some quick little questions. One, the the commitment letters that you talked about. One of the things that we talked about even in joint facilities is how long that would last for. So for those commitment letters, once we get them through the state, how long do we have those so when we go for a referendum?
Great question. So the commitment letter from the state, so we're talking next year, spring of next year. Once you have that letter, it's 2 years to get a shovel in the ground.
Okay.
There have been communities that asked for extensions, and in fact, one of the requests was to extend the second half of the plan, the 2 schools that are further out, because we know that now. So.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
on the record, it's 2 years. Yep.
Perfect. And STOW and ESS, I know that obviously that is a concern of a lot of people. That's something, again, we've talked in joint facilities, and the roofs is a big concern. So just to clarify on that part of it, it's not like they're being pushed away. That is something that we've talked about in joint facilities to do as our next roofs in the roof referendum. So that's definitely, a moving part, and hopefully is going to happen, and we'll get that forward. Some of the other things, just little comments, because I really, truly do love this plan. I've asked all the questions I possibly could when it comes to our meetings, and I'm just excited about obviously moving forward with this. So pre-K, I love the fact, Antonia, I love the fact that there is the school within a school. It is like one of my most favorite things. It's sad to see that separation of STOW. The pre-K would move out of that, but to bring that magic into all of our schools because we love it so much would be absolutely amazing. Children obviously learning differently, and that hands-on approach is going to be so helpful with all of our kids, not just our special needs children, but every single child that will be in our school. So it's great. Our safe space and our specialized spaces, I feel like we talked about it, but I must have missed it, but I love it because with the teachers and the students, like we're supporting them in a whole. Right now, to have any type of small meeting or anything like that is hard because it's in smaller spaces, PPT meetings, those types of things. I mean, it's great to be able to see that that's going to grow and expand. And then community spaces in the new schools. You talked about oh my gosh, I had it in my head. Oh, like the pantry and stuff like that. So those spaces we're going to make in the new schools. That's what we're going to try to do, because I think that's such a great support for our parents and community in a whole. So yeah, I think that's it, but thanks.
Ms. McGuire-Bruce?
Just quickly, first of all, thank you for all the work that you've done. I know there's been lots of meetings and lots of time spent together, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate the answers to all the questions, but specifically the security questions. Looking at it as a whole picture, I'm thrilled for doors that lock on the inside, but I really appreciate that you looked at landscaping and all the different aspects of that and really took the time to answer that for us. I'm also super excited about a maker space and the flexible use of spaces for small group. So I will have lots of questions as the building committee and design and all those things happen, but thank you for all of the work you've done, and I'm looking forward to helping this move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Gauss?
Hi, and I know I was in part of a lot of these meetings too, but this is kind of as things come to fruition, we talk about little parts of it, and it grows and changes as we go. I'm a little concerned there's so little space dedicated to general education in comparison to all of the other fun stuff. That's just one of my concerns. Nobody has to answer it. But I do have an actual question that kind of segues off of one of Mr. Kober's questions, and that comes to the design. How will the designs be done by neighborhood? Because, as someone that does things repetitively quite often, it just seems like it would cost Enfield less to make one school and then have little parts of it maybe change, but overall have 4 cookie cutter schools. It just seems more practical to somebody that actually does things in quantity.
great comment, and thank you for the opportunity to maybe expand on my description of how the design could be different but the same. So I think what would be important and natural as part of the design of the course of design is making standardizing components of the building so you can maximize efficiency, building systems, fixtures, lighting, controls, the hardware. So there will be considerable efficiencies when you're looking at a program like this, and those I apologize I didn't comment on that earlier, but that would be the baseline to make sure that these efficiencies are born into. Because you do want to capitalize on that repetitive nature and see some cost efficiencies in that for sure. I guess where it could deviate slightly is in the material palette, the colors. We are often in buildings these days. We have wall protection that can be printed, so it reflects kind of the location of where the building's located. So I think there's some creative ways to fold in the aesthetic and the design, but there's also some thoughtful ways to pick up the efficiencies. So absolutely, I want to make sure that the community understands that there will be efficiencies in this plan for sure.
So I just want to capitalize on what he was saying, is that right now, every light fixture is different in every school. So they have to have a stock of so much. The efficiency that they're speaking of, Tecton's speaking of, is just that, a mechanical system. You could buy 1,000 filters for your ductwork. You could buy, balusters. You could buy anything you want, but it'll be able to be used in all the schools, not just one school. The site is another big thing. We're going to be building a school behind existing schools. Each site is different, so we can't make one fit all because we may not have that proper space at that time of building it. And then once it's built, then we can tear down the existing and do fields and parking and all that. But you have your site, which is a big restriction. They're not all the same. Some of them are narrow, some of them you could barely get a bus through now. But the efficiencies of the materials that we're going to be using is going to be unbelievable savings to this town. Unfortunately, it's not how it's done right now. Every school, everything is so different. And I don't know how they keep track of it, so.
And then I pulled this slide up only just for clarification on your question. It's a good question, and I think we could have been more clear when we're describing this. But starting with the dedicated educational space is a large majority of this pie. The general classrooms, the typical classrooms, are the blue. But as you work around, obviously, specialized ed in the programs and support spaces, the purple on, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I guess at 3 o'clock, 3 to 6, 3 to 6 o'clock is your media, your arts, your music, your gym, and your cafeteria. So those all are dedicated to the educational space. We often refer to them in short as specials, but they're dedicated space for the educational. So typical classrooms, you're right, it's just less than half as far as the classroom, but we want the support spaces, arts, gym, music, and media to. So basically, you're taking up about 85% of that pie is purely dedicated to educational classrooms, if you will. So hopefully that clarifies it.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright?
I just want to say, I understand what you're asking, Dean, as far as the gen ed side of things. Why is it so small? We can't think of those spaces, the other spaces, as just the fun spaces, because again, they're learning spaces. So instead of keeping the kids in the classroom or having art on a cart. Like, honestly, those are good spaces to move out of.
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You're fine.
I have asked all of those questions knowing the answers, but knowing that nobody that's watching this has heard those answers, and it's really important for that information to get out there in the way that it did.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning it as much as I'm trying to look at it from the eyes of someone that hasn't been in months of meetings and things like that to get that information out there.
Totally understandable. I just wanted to expand on it because I wanted people to understand, and like you had shown that slide of the kids sitting in the classrooms the way that they were. It is definitely not like that anymore. Maybe during COVID it was like that, but we don't want to go back that way. So, but I think it's really honestly some great spaces that are really going to support every single child in the school. So.
Any other questions? Mr. Kober.
Thank you. So circling back, just a couple, again, more clarifying points, but the ed specs as presented, and towards the end you have a little narrative on the space waiver, like through the state of Connecticut. I noticed like it doesn't, I guess, quantify the need for that, so can you, and again, to Mr. Gauss's point, just, I guess, speak publicly to it, and then maybe like just delineate like how much over the square footage are we that we need the waiver?
Good question. So I think we dedicated at least one, maybe two of our meetings specifically to looking at the size of the program. And to answer the question in short, the specialized education students is in this district is higher than the state average, into the 20s. You see on the screen about 24% of the dedicated space of this building at 24% for specialized education. The overage, so the building overall is about 18% over the allowable area, okay? So I think from a community perspective, are we spending our dollars wisely? We're doing better on the overall building. We're only 18% over the allowable area, and we're getting all of the necessary program elements into this building. So one of the main drivers was the specialized programs. What it does is it allows the community to capitalize on some additional reimbursement as well. So there's a twofold there. And then the other component is focusing on the pre-K program, and Antonio spoke to the different types of the pre-K program. So those needs historically drive more space, needs for more space. So those are the two main drivers, but without a doubt, it was the specialized ed, which to the credit of the district, wonderful program. And it's showing up in the data, it's showing up in our square footages, and it's a piece that I think the community can continue to support and get the additional reimbursement from the state at the same time.
So the ed specs aren't, their job is not to pick that stuff out. When we addressed the legislation and asked for the special, that's where it's defined the hardship of the square foot, lack of square foot, and the cost and overage. So that is all part of what was submitted to the legislation. The ed specs is not the area where that would be displayed. This is just ed specs are pertaining to the buildings we're building.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Daigle. So, and again, just to, I guess, clarify for like the bigger picture then, so the waiver for that, I mean, historically, do we generally see those go through? If for any reason it doesn't, would we come back to the ed specs and then theoretically cut that 18%? Or I guess what would that look like for, what if scenarios?
At that point, it's going to be an open decision because we're going to, there's a percentage that we can go over and still, be affordable. We don't have to take every inch of it, every square foot out of it. We can go with a happy medium. We can redefine some spaces. One of the problems we don't want to have is we don't want to build these buildings and then it's not adequate the day we build them. So, I understand it's a tax issue, but it's also a responsible issue on everybody's part to build a building that is used. And the thing is too, is we're designing a building that's gonna be built in 4 years, 5 years. We've designed Enfield High School, and we had like over almost 17 to 20% extra classrooms. The day we moved in, we probably had 2. The first year, they needed more classrooms. JFK, it took 5 years from the design to being built. In that time, programs added, programs changes. We had 5 or 6 different classrooms open for movable teaching. Everyone was filled up the first year that we did it. SOAR classes tripled, so we had to divide some classes that were general use into SOAR classes, special ed classes. So we do our damnedest to try to figure out what the future is, but there is a fine line of doing what's right and fine line of what we can afford. So it's not we're not gonna just reel in and say, okay, we gotta lose 17%. We gotta reevaluate it and say, okay, where can we go short, knowing it's gonna be not adequate when we build it. So that's something that we all have to take in consideration and realize the public's gonna come back at some point and say, again, why'd you build a building too small? So, great question. It's a tough field.
Yeah, no, like I said, thank you, Mr. Daigle, and I think that paints a good picture, is obviously when we talked about the timeline at the beginning, looking for when ground will actually break to when we get from phase 1 to phase 2 and stuff like that. I think that's important to keep in mind that, yeah, things change. I know previously I've spoken to, and I made a note, I guess, and this is more of a general comment, just obviously about enrollment projections. I know you guys based it off of like the maximum potential enrollment based on the next, I think going up to 2035, you guys had a study that kind of went up. I know previously the district had contracted with another company to get some enrollment projections, and they kind of saw, I think, a little more of a decline. I think you guys had it was overall, and it looked at total school enrollment, not just PK through 5. But I think because of like housing applications and projected what's coming to town, I think you guys are kind of estimating a little bit higher. I think it was maybe for the PK through 5 specifically, I think it's maybe like 75 more students versus the other, the report we got from Peter Prouda was a little lower than that. And again, I know we got some narrative on the differences. So I think that's something in my mind too. And I think, Chairman Daigle kind of said with, the high school maybe was built at one point projecting this enrollment, and the population of Enfield has shifted, and we've become an older town, and there's less and less kids. And I think we're going to see that at the older grades. Obviously, PK through 5 is a little harder. I think some of the legislation we got to be cognizant of is obviously with the pre-K as it is. I mean, are we going to have universal pre-K or are we not? Because that's obviously going to affect the usage of that. I think now we talk about it's, between the different pre-K programs we have, it's, I think, about 70 students. I don't know, the superintendent can correct me if I'm wrong. In pre-K right now, is it 110 across all 3 programs? Okay.
I'm pretty sure within Stowe it's 110 for right?
No,
Head Start and integrated. No. 102. Thank you.
100. Okay, just
Thanks.
Head Start.
Head Start. That's just Head Start.
Just Head Start. Okay, so yeah, and then I know when we look at our actual grade levels, we're in the several hundreds. So just kind of comments, and again, things to be cognizant of. So I won't keep us too long, but just some of the other comments I had, and I know we spoke to it. I think you guys highlighted it. Is
On your point, what
Yes.
we found interesting is after we built the high school, during that time we had, I want to say numbers, I don't know, in the 400 or 500s, or at least the high 300s and 400s of kids that were going to magnet schools. And we opened the new building, and a great deal of them returned back to Enfield, which we were excited about. And I think we saw that with JFK as well. So I think that was part of the driving force in why some of the numbers went up by the time the high school opened. So that was a driving force in that too. And what I find super interesting about this project is we're planning for kids that are not born yet. And I found that very interesting because unlike JFK and the high school, it was just a little bit less of an intrinsic demography report. And we spent a great deal of time at that pre-ref meeting speaking with the demographer because it's a very unique project as far as trying to determine what the enrollment's going to look like at that time, and taking into consideration the housing projects that are on the table through the town.
Yeah, no, and that's a great way of putting it too. With the older grades, watching the demographics from grade to grade versus students that are going to be 3 to 5 going into pre-K that aren't even born yet. So just some of the other general comments, and again, I don't want to hog the mic for the entire night, but just some things I kind of want to mention. I know you guys talked about, and there were some questions relating to like partner program space, whether it was the food pantry or the school-based health clinic. I know from like a personal viewpoint, like if we're doing ed specs and focusing on like EPS programs, I understand the value of those programs, but if we're turning over space to the town of Enfield, I think some of those might be better suited in town space to, and again, potentially if we have to reduce percentages, I think those might be areas where we could, maybe use like a multi-purpose room or use something else, like if they're coming temporarily to the school, rather than carving out like, hey, we're speccing out, this is going to be for the school-based health center, when they're really just kind of like a contracted partner with us. So that was kind of one of my, I don't want to say hesitation, but just something like a consideration, I guess would be a good way of putting it. One of the things at the state website I was looking and kind of through I know the full ed specs, I think for the schools was like 150 pages and took some time, but I did make it through 150. But the state website showed, when we were talking about square footage, like normally the ed specs will say like the before, the during, and the after for the square footage. And I noticed our ed specs just say like the square footage at the end. I don't know if you guys had seen any other examples, or if you could speak to, I guess, why we don't list the current square footage for our programs.
I think you might be referring to, there's a form, I think it's SCG 2500, where it lists what you just described, existing and then proposed. Typically, those are related to addition renovation or renovate as new projects. What they're trying to understand is what, what spaces you're keeping, adding, or changing. So that's how that gets tracked. These projects we will need to submit a 2500 that form, but it would just be all new. So I think the comparison that you may have looked at was more or less for renovate as new or
for new construction. Okay, and you might be right, because I know the portal within ct.gov, obviously it covers new construction and renovations.
Yep.
I just caught that and I wondered, because I figured that would be a good example too. And again, for like public information, like we're going to get these new schools. How much bigger, how much more space are we have? What are we adding? And I thought that would be kind of cool to look at. Again, that was probably, had I digested it sooner, it may have been something to kind of send through to get to you guys. But again, it may have been more work than you guys would have been able to get for tonight. So again, not a big deal, just something I kind of wanted us to be cognizant of. And I guess one of the other things, and you guys kind of touched on it with like the way pre-K is kind of going to be separated from the other grades. And then through the ed specs, I know it talks about like the benefits of, it uses the phrase like cross-aids mentorship and collaboration. And I kind of like that, but when you're seeing kids in like pre-K, obviously with the older grades, I think there's pros and cons, obviously, to if they interact. So I guess, can you kind of speak to like how the specs would affect, like, generally, like, I'm assuming there wouldn't be a point where there'd be unsupervised fifth graders near the PK wing or the kindergarten wing and stuff like that. So could you just, I guess,
Mr. Kober, I
visualize that?
think you're way down the road on that. That would be an administrative procedure that we would have in place. And I think there's a lot of value and benefit. And we see it, for example, at Enfield Street School right now. Our pre-K kids being with our second grade kids. Now, I know this is, we're talking about pre-K all the way up through grade 5, but at no point would we be talking about, for example, pre-K kids having recess time at the same time as a grade 5 student. Right? We would break it up administratively so that the school within a school model is appropriate. I don't know if the ed specs, that's in my mind, and I'm jumped in on your behalf, but it's well outside of the scope of what the ed specs need to be discussing. It would definitely be something that, the administration, along with the principals at those buildings and the teachers, would make sure that we have proper procedures for. Well, I mean, we do have recess aides, so they would get incorporated as well, but.
Thank you, Mr. Macchio. I was going to jump in too. So, Phil, I have lots of thoughts and considerations about the design piece. I just want to remind us that we are talking about the high-level ed specs, and some of those things I think will be in kind of future discussions.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is very important. I think the advent of these SLCs, or small learning communities, the idea behind them is to keep kind of grade level community, like early elementary, pre-K, K together, where they do not have to travel through a fifth grade learning community to get to a bathroom, to get to the art room, to get to the gym, to get to the cafeteria. So that's kind of woven, bless you, that's woven into the ed spec. Those diagrams are important in a pre-K to 5, and so how you exactly design them and how you operate them, those are discussions future discussions, but I think, rest assured, I think we have it captured with the description and the pedagogy of a small learning community, because that's the exact intent.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I get the operational side, obviously, with, movement of students and stuff like that, lunch waves, recess waves, I think I just kind of tied it into, like, the way you had the slide where it has the kindergarten square and the PK square, and, like, they have their own independent drop-off. Obviously, PK, K through 5 might not. Obviously, something later down the road, we could start, start times, whatever. I get all that, because at some point, even as much as you do, if they're all coming in at the same time, they would theoretically interact unless they came in separate. So I understand that. I guess the last the last thing I guess I'll ask before I'll kind of give up, and I know again, let some other people speak or see where we want to go, is I noticed kind of in the ed specs, we spec'd out like what we call like time-aside rooms. We have time-aside rooms with seclusion rooms, without seclusion rooms. I guess, can you speak to why those are spec'd out? And then are we copying what we have? Are we creating new spaces that we don't have, and kind of how those came into play?
Thank you, Jeff. Great question. So the time-aside spaces are, I think, part of the model that is currently unfolding within Enfield. We know that Eagle Academy utilizes those, and the elementary schools are also utilizing that framework. And what it allows for is, within the classroom, there's a calming corner area for students to take a break within the classroom, but the time-asides just offer a separate space removed from the classroom to just reset. So that you can come back ready to learn. So some of those spaces have another layer of reset, of decompression associated with them, and others are without that. So we just wanted to provide that flexibility and how those are distributed across the learning communities, and that's all to be developed in the design phase. But long story short, they're to offer just additional opportunities to reset as part of a district framework that currently exists that we're continuing to support.
Awesome. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. And I'll yield my time.
Mr. Anderson?
One last question. Why is the cost per square foot so high?
It's a great question. So the costs that you see in all the material that's presented at this evening or at previous public presentations is based on historical data, and it's based on total project costs. So that is everything it costs to deliver the project. So, so we speak to, and we've had many conversations about the construction costs and then all the soft costs. Construction is about 80%, soft costs are about 20%. So, yeah, if you take the building off this ground, turn it upside down and shake it, all the tables, chairs, architects that come out, that's all soft costs. Everything else is construction. We've, as I mentioned at the onset, and I maybe spoke maybe a little too quickly about it, was we've coordinated our cost estimates with a construction manager that does a large majority of public K-12 construction throughout the region, in particular in Connecticut. We're seeing today's costs for this grade level configuration in the $650 to $750 range right today. So we've included escalation at a 4.25 compounded on a yearly basis to the midpoint of construction, which is what the state requires you to do. So those costs are added, and they also require a considerable owner contingency on top of it. Or recommended, because about 4 or 5 years ago, everybody put in grant applications, and there was this extreme escalation when everybody thought the world was going to end, and it didn't, and everybody put their projects out. They're now asking you to carry more contingency because they don't want to see you back. So it's based on historical guidance, team guidance based on all of our experiences, the escalation, the contingencies, and the total project costs. What is important with that budget number is that you don't go back. You can always spend less, but it's very difficult to go back and get reimbursement if you need more. So that was our approach philosophy for this planning phase.
Right. So I asked AI because that's what everybody does.
Sure.
And AI says an elementary school should be in the $250, $300 square foot range. Just the school, not soft costs, not escalation, none of that stuff, just the cost of the school. So I asked another AI because, they're all going to be different.
Sure.
Said the same thing.
Sign me up.
I was going to say, I think there's also a
that's-
demolition cost to this. There's like many other costs that have gone into it.
I'm just looking at the cost of the building. The cost of the buildings is $59 million. That doesn't include the demo, that doesn't include site work, it doesn't include soft costs, it doesn't include escalation, none of that. It's just the building. So at just the building, it's $600 a square foot.
If we build a building, if we have the exact same building we bid out in Enfield, and then we have the exact same building we built in Stanford, they're at almost 800 to 850 for the exact same building. 650, 625, 650 is the standard of the state of all our, every school, universities, that is the norm. Your house, you're building a house at 275 to 240, it'll be 240 to 275 on a house per square foot. So you're not building a school for 250.
Right, I don't build schools, that's why I'm asking questions.
Yeah.
It just seems,
The thing too is we have retainage in there that is, if we don't use it, we bring it back. We've been fortunate enough for the high school, we brought back a little over, almost 6.2 million. JFK, we have about 3.8 million that are returnable. All the other elementary schools, we did a total of 6.6 million. So we've been lucky enough to be able to control the cost of the construction during it, the cost of the construction during it. So anything that's not used, when we go to the state and we're asking for money, we're getting a line of credit. We're not getting 200 million and then, we start getting interest on it. We're getting a line of credit. So what we use, we pay on only what we use. And then while we're building, that is being reimbursed. So at no point we're gonna be pulling 200 million. We're gonna be pulling 60 million here, 20 million there, and then that starts getting paid. So now that's getting paid by the time we get to the end, and then you have a 20-year bond on top of it. So at no point we're gonna say, okay, it passes, we want a check tomorrow. Everybody in town owns this much. It doesn't work that way. So it is a long process of approval to issuing checks. But the cost, to get back to the cost, you're building a house at 240 to 270. I'd love to build a building like that.
And I think there's plenty of real-world examples of neighboring communities that have built multiple elementary schools in a similar time frame. I would encourage, we can provide that data because that's what we use to base our costs on. But South Windsor went through a campaign. We just completed a project in Madison, Norwalk, Cheshire is almost complete. So there's several examples, recent examples of cost per square foot that we'd be happy to share with the community and completely explain how we arrived at the numbers where we did. Absolutely.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. So I would just say AI can be a really helpful tool, but it doesn't always have human judgment, lived experience, or those comparative numbers, which I think will be helpful for us to kind of see across the district. I'm going to close this out with one question and then a couple comments. One, can you share some next steps? So you mentioned a pre-ref committee kind of happening tonight. When will this go to town council? And then kind of, I think the grant application is due by June 30th. So I just kind of want to know, when is this going to the town? So those of us who are watching or paying attention can kind of see what the next step will be.
So we're planning to give a presentation to the town. I believe it's on the 20th.
Yeah.
So, I'll, no, hang on, let me just grab mine. It's for the next meeting.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but I think it's important that folks.
I just don't want to, okay, so, We are preparing a presentation for the town council. We'll be presenting on 4/20, where there's 3 resolutions that are part of the grant application that we're requesting they approve on for each of the 5 projects. Other activities that are part of the grant application, Phase 1 environmental surveys, those are scheduled for next week as the students are out of school. So they're planning to happen on 4/13 and 4/14, so that's a component of the grant application. The estimates were coordinated with Gilbane, so we have that detail, and that detail needs to get posted and then to the website and then downloaded and inserted into the grant application. So we're moving our way through the checklist items. The major components are the resolutions from the town council, the educational specification approvals, the site due diligence, and the estimates. So those 4 or 5 components are all well underway. We feel confident that we'll hit our marks where we need to. There's a lot of technical pieces where we need not only the vote of the approval, but we need the minutes of the approved motion. That's what the state is looking for, so that takes some time. But all the other components are in motion, but the next presentation is on April 20th for the town council.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's important for us to all know. I also want to thank you again, and also thank John Daig is there in the background. I want to thank you personally for all of your dedication to this as well and the hard work that you're doing. I know you're helping Steve in central office and the team put in that grant application, so thank everybody here. A couple points I want to make before I call for our motions. One is I just want some clarification, or I'm just going to share with the community some clarification on the sites. Randy, thank you for clarifying the complicated nature of selecting sites. There's a lot that goes in it. Space, acreage requirements, all of those pieces. Personally, I was very sad not to see a school in Thompsonville, but I strongly believe that we will be purposeful in our planning and our programming to ensure that that community is well served. I also want to remind the community around costs, so I know that might seem like a high cost to some, but the reality is we are in a place with our schools that something needs to be done, and I know this subcommittee, so I was on the subcommittee before it got shifted over. We looked at what would it take just to do some Band-Aid fixes, and it is not cost effective. It is not good for our community. It doesn't add any additional programming or space. So thinking about the importance of maximizing taxpayer dollars, this plan really does that. So thank you so much for that. And then I also just want to talk about the importance of embedding our programming. Places like a family resource space is already embedded in our schools, small, but seeing that commitment to our families and our school-based health centers, this opportunity to expand services, valuable services to our students. It also connects to the point, Antonia, that you made around whole wellness, that we know that building design and space and programming actually supports better student outcomes. So I think that's a really important piece to include. So thank you again for your hard work. I'm going to ask for folks to be patient with us. We do need to approve these as 5 individual motions, so we're going to start making those now. So do I have a motion to approve the Hazardville Memorial Elementary School ed specs dated April 8th?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Gerard, seconded by Ms. Kiner. Roll call vote. Discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a brief comment. I think the project rationale and narrative that was presented and kind of in the ed specs provides like a strong why, especially when we look at the age of our elementary schools compared to the more recent renovations at our middle school and high school. As I kind of discussed and I mentioned, I still do have some open considerations regarding like projected enrollment, overall design, some of the learning and educational activities, and like the proposed space requirements, especially when we look at things like the seclusionary rooms and then the expanded offices and support services. So that's kind of where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kober. I think we all are excited for the design phase. Any other discussion? All right, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Ms. Roculio.
Yes.
Ms. Cushman.
Yes.
Mrs. Gerard.
Yes.
Mr. Gauss.
Yes.
Mrs. Kiner.
Yes.
Mr. Kober.
I'll abstain.
Mrs. McGuire Bruce.
Yes.
Board Chair Pickett.
Yes.
Okay, passes 801.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to our second. Do I have a motion to approve the Prudence Crandall Elementary School ed specs dated April 8th?
So moved.
Second.
So moved by Ms. Gerard, second by Ms. Kiner. Any discussion on that one? Roll call vote.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Broculio?
Yes.
Mrs. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Gerard?
Yes.
Mr. Gauss?
Yes.
Mrs. Kiner?
Yes.
Mr. Kober?
Abstain.
Mrs. McGuire Bruce?
Yes.
Board Chair Pickett?
Yes.
Motion passes 801.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the Edgar H. Parkman Elementary School ed specs dated April 8th?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Gerard, seconded by Ms. Kiner. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Broculio?
Yes.
Mrs. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Gerard?
Yes.
Mr. Gauss?
Yes.
Mrs. Kiner?
Yes.
Mr. Kober?
Abstain.
Mrs. McGuire Bruce?
Yes.
Board Chair Pickett?
Yes. All right.
Motion passes 801.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the Henry Barnard Elementary School ed specs dated April 8th?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Gerard, seconded by Ms. Kiner. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Broculio?
Yes.
Mrs. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Gerard?
Yes.
Mr. Gauss?
Yes.
Mrs. Kiner?
Yes.
Mr. Kober?
Abstain.
Mrs. McGuire Bruce?
Yes.
Board Chair Pickett?
Yes.
Motion passes 801.
And lastly, we have a motion around Eagle Academy Therapeutic Program. I think it's important for the public to know we spent a lot of time talking about our pre-K-5 programming. In our EdSpec packet, there was a detailed plan around Eagle Academy and the reuse of Eli Whitney, so thank you for that, and the importance of growing our specialized programming and servicing our students.
Can we make sure that we clarify the fact that this is the Eagle Academy at Eli Whitney Elementary School?
Yes, I wasn't making the motion yet.
Yeah. Just want to make sure we get it right because of that construction
I
grant
got you.
process.
I got it written out.
Oh, well, then I'll just be quiet.
Thank you, though. Do I have a motion to approve the Eagle Academy Therapeutic Program at Eli Whitney Elementary School ed specs dated April 8th?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Gerard, seconded by Ms. Kiner. Discussion, Mr. Kober.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just brief comments on this, and I think you did a good job highlighting the importance of this. We didn't speak to it much tonight. However, this was included as a separate ed spec packet. It wasn't quite 154 pages. It was pretty close in the PDF version. I think it's important to kind of differentiate, obviously, that this is not new construction. This would be renovation, taking the current location of Eagle Academy and moving it to Eli Whitney. I think some of the things we see there are obviously well-needed improvements, and looking at enrollment there, where we're currently capped at about 30. The ed specs for this proposes could bring us up to, I believe it was 105, and the space requirements. So this I'm definitely in support of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kober. Roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Broculio?
Yes.
Mrs. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Gerard?
Yes.
Mr. Gauss?
Yes.
Mrs. Kiner?
Yes.
Mr. Kober?
Yes.
Mrs. McGuire Bruce?
Catch my breath. Yes.
Board Chair Pickett?
Yes.
Motion passes 900.
Thank you. So hopefully we're going to get you out in time to get to your next meeting. Thank you again so much for coming and sharing all this information and all the hard work that you've been doing. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Kober, seconded by Ms. Gerard. Hand vote. That looks like, I'm going to assume Rosalie's in there, but we can say 8-0-1. We'll give her an abstention.